It's been 8 years since Scotland voted to remain part of the United Kingdom, but Scottish independence is still a frequent topic of debate in Britain. Arguably, it's as big an issue as ever. Why? Here's the story. Until the Act of Union formally created Great Britain in 1707, the Kingdom of Scotland had its own parliament. This was dissolved, and Scotland instead sent representatives to the National Parliament, located in the part of London called Westminster. Not having its own parliament did not sit well with many Scots, and the issue became increasingly prominent over time, especially when, in the 1960s, Scotland began to consistently vote for the centre-left Labour Party. But England, with a much bigger population, ensured the frequent election of Conservative Party governments. Finally, in 1997, Labour leader Tony Blair came to power, promising to decentralise power, a process known as devolution. And 2 years later, the Scottish Parliament at Holyrood in Edinburgh was re-established. Labour won the first Holyrood election easily, but it wasn't an outright victory. Holyrood uses a proportional voting system that makes it nearly impossible for any one party to win a majority, but it still looked likely at the time that the new parliament would be a permanent Labour stronghold. It was also argued that the new arrangement gave Scotland enough autonomy to blunt future calls for independence, or as one Labour politician put it, devolution will kill nationalism stone dead. At the time, Scotland's main pro-independence movement, the Scottish Nationalist Party, was only a minor player in British politics, but it did have a talented and charismatic leader named Alex Salmond, who led the SNP to the centre-left mainstream of Scottish politics to broaden its appeal. This worked. At the first two Holyrood elections, the SNP came in second. Then, in 2007, it surpassed Labour to take first place. For 4 years, Salmond led a relatively popular minority government, and then in 2011, the SNP won the only outright majority in Scottish parliamentary history. A majority for one party wasn't meant to be possible, but the SNP had done it anyway. Now they could finally pass legislation to set up an independence referendum, as long as the UK government agreed. Prime Minister David Cameron did agree, and the referendum was scheduled for 2014. After a hard-fought, bitter campaign, the Scottish people voted to remain in the UK by a margin of just over 10%. This was a huge blow for the nationalist cause. For a brief moment, the independence issue appeared dead. But the SNP continued to rack up impressive electoral victories under new leader Nicola Sturgeon, including a landslide victory in the 2015 Westminster elections and another first-place finish in the 2016 Holyrood elections. The nationalists clearly remained popular. Could they hold another referendum? In the June 2016 Brexit referendum, 62% of Scots voted to remain in the European Union. But the UK as a whole, especially England, voted to leave. This was such a disruptive change to the UK constitution that Sturgeon argued, with some merit, that it amounted to a, quote, material change in circumstances, which justified another independence vote. The Scottish government has relentlessly pushed for one ever since. There is a consensus in British politics that if the Scottish people do clearly and unambiguously vote to leave the UK, they should be allowed to do so. But neither Labour nor the Conservatives appear inclined to allow a second vote anytime soon. This matters, because in 2022, the UK Supreme Court ruled that independence referendums cannot be called without Westminster's approval. This ruling has created a stalemate. The SNP lacks the means to make independence happen, but it remains Scotland's most popular party, at least for now, and it only exists to pursue independence. It's not at all clear what will happen next, other than that the issue of independence will not go away soon. What would an independent Scotland be like? Scottish nationalists argue that, free from the rest of the UK, Scotland would be a more progressive, more prosperous, and fairer society, possibly like its neighbours Norway or Ireland. Official SNP policy is also to rejoin the EU, but keep the pound, or have its own currency, not adopt the euro. Is this realistic? My friend Lambertus from the EU Made Simple can tell us more.
One of the key requirements for joining the EU is to make a commitment towards joining the euro. There are also two further challenges, such as the Scottish-UK border and EU member state opposition. Check out my full video for more detail.
EU membership really matters for Scotland because without it, it would not be an automatic member of the World Trade Organization, the international body that ensures global trade is relatively open and fair. In today's globally integrated world, an independent Scotland would be economically isolated and vulnerable until it joins, but this typically takes a new country years or decades. For this reason and others, becoming independent tends to cause severe economic distress for new countries. Since 1991, most new countries have emerged from communist dictatorships or during civil wars, and risking the economy was a price worth paying. What the Scottish independence movement is attempting, making an already prosperous country more prosperous through independence, has never been tried before, let alone shown to be possible. Scottish voters may like the SNP's vision of a small, wealthy country with a Scandinavian-style social democracy, but there's no way to guarantee that this is what Scotland would become. If they're ever given a second chance to vote, the Scottish people will have to decide, is independence worth the risk?